All right, good morning. I hope you're all having a great Friday so far. My name is Chantal, Director of Membership Services at St. Joseph Media. It's great to have you all here for a virtual fireside chat with guest host Andrew Oliver, President and CEO of Oliver and Bonacini. TL Insider Fireside Chats feature the most compelling people in politics, society, literature, fashion, design, food, and more as part of our virtual TL Insider programming. Here are some quick housekeeping rules. Please make sure to keep your mic and cam turned off until the Q&A session at the end of the event. But we do encourage you to ask any questions you may have throughout the event in the chat box at the bottom of your screen. I'd like to introduce our host, Jason Magnoy, Head of Business Development at St. Joseph Media, who will lead the conversation with Andrew today. Take it away, Jason.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for joining us. This is going to be a great conversation. Obviously, for TL Insider, restaurants and food experiences are a huge part of the membership experience. It's a huge part of what members love about the program. And Oliver and Bonacini is a signature partner of the program. They've made a huge impact making the membership as successful as it is. So I'd love to introduce Andrew. Andrew is the president and CEO of Oliver and Bonacini Hospitality. O&B is recognized as one of Canada's leading hospitality companies, operating a diverse portfolio of innovative and celebrated restaurants, including Canoe, Lenya, and Auberge de Pommier, as well as unique event venues such as Arcadian and the Carlu. During his tenure, Andrew has increased event-specific sales by over 500% and established the company as an industry leader, forging key partnerships with Hudson's Bay, Compass Group Canada, Big Rock Brewery, and Katz Group. In 2018, he led the acquisition of Concord Entertainment Group, doubling the company's portfolio of restaurants, with 10 restaurant and event venue openings in Toronto, Montreal, Saskatoon, Calgary, and Edmonton over the last 3 years. Andrew has been credited as the driving force behind O&B's successful national expansion. In 2020, Andrew co-founded Save Hospitality, a coalition of independent restaurateurs lobbying for government support to help the restaurant industry survive the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you for joining us, Andrew.
For having me.
So my first question is, how are you? how have you been during the crisis?
Yeah, look, I think like first and foremost, my family's safe, everyone's healthy, so I'm blessed on that. And all the biggest concerns out there are things that I've been able to avoid so far, which is great. Otherwise, I think I'm going stir crazy. I was not meant to be, staying in a house for this amount of time, but I've done my best to try and make the best use of that time. And I've lost 50 pounds in 2.5 months, which is a good thing. Looking forward to putting all that back on when I go back out to restaurants. But no, look, all in all, of all the people out there who complain, I'm not one of them.
And I'd love to hear more about your career. I mean, what journey led you to O&B? You've done an amazing amount for the company in the past 3 years. So I'd love to hear about what got you to O&B.
Yeah, so look, but before I joined O&B, I went to McGill, did a Bachelor of Commerce degree, degrees in accounting and finance. Originally I thought I was just going to work in finance and become a banker, private equity guy, and I ended up joining a family office straight out of college that managed plus or minus $100 million at the time. I did that for about 5 years and did very well doing that, and realized though that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I'd learned a lot from a lot of different industries, a lot of different companies that we had invested in at that family office. But really just saw that the best way to kind of reach what I thought what my potential was to get a business, invest in a business, and grow that business and see what we could do. And so around 2010, 2009, 2010, O&B had just started their events business with their partnership with the Toronto Region Board of Trade. And things weren't going as well as they'd hoped with that partnership at the time. And they were considering exiting that side of the business. I was still at the firm that I was at, but looking to do something different. Looked at the business, thought there was a huge opportunity, huge potential, specifically on the event side of the business. Went to Peter Oliver and Michael Bonacini, Peter, my father, and Michael, his partner, and made them an offer to invest into that business and said, look, I'll cover all the losses that this business has as part of my investment, which literally almost bankrupted me, but I took that gamble. And within 2 years, the events business grew to be more profitable than the restaurant business, which they had been known for. At that time, we had 8 or 9 business units, and we went into 2020 with 70, just over 70, I think, with a dozen under construction. So it has been a hugely positive experience up until COVID. We had our ups and downs like everyone else, but overall, we've been able to grow the business, become national, invest in other operators like IQ Foods. We were founders of IQ Foods and huge supporters there. I've been on the board of IQ Foods since day one. The founder there went to college, went to McGill with me, invested in Pizzeria Libretto and helped them grow their business. And it's been a true joy to be able to do that and help evolve the food scenes in the cities that we operate.
So that's something that I've noticed. Like with O&B, there was a ton of momentum entering 2020. So many incredible things happening. COVID hits. So how is O&B doing now?
Yeah, look, I think like everyone in the industry, outside those few specific folks that are, the pizzas of the world or the Swiss chalets, where a huge part of their business was takeout to begin with. Look, COVID hit us like a ton of bricks. We closed our restaurants before we were mandated to, which was a Herculean effort. I mean, we had to lay off close to 3,500 people in 2 to 3 days, which was gut-wrenching and challenging. And effectively, we went from doing large volumes and huge amount of sales and feeding hundreds of thousands of people a week to zero. So it was literally like running into a brick wall. We repositioned ourselves. We're doing takeout at a handful of our locations, doing our best to keep as many people as employed as we can and navigating through this. But I'd say as a group now, between us and our partners, we went from, again, 3,500 employees to about 100, and our sales are still down 95 to 98%. We have pivoted to now opening more and more places as we gear up for that ramp up, and we're cautiously optimistic about how that will go. While at the same time, you need to be realistic. This is not going to be a V-shaped recovery for our industry. I don't think for most industries. And though you might have that big pop in those opening weeks of when we open, our position here is this will be a 2 years really to get back to where we hoped 2020 would have been. And I think that the more realistic that entrepreneurs are and restaurateurs are about that fact, the more likelihood they're going to have in success by being just really smart and prudent with how you manage things.
Well, I mean, the idea of the pivot is what everyone keeps talking about. Everyone is pivoting all over the place. Obviously on social media, I'm seeing restaurants it seems like they're trying to celebrate the fact that they've all moved into the delivery space, doing more direct to consumer. You guys have moved into grocery delivery. You're moving into the space as well. In terms of the question is, like, has it worked? Like, in terms of like, is it enough at least to keep the lights on for now?
Yeah, look, I'd say necessity breeds ingenuity at the end of the day. And so I think as an industry, we just don't want to sit on the sidelines and do nothing. At the end of the day, you have to figure out what to do to try and improve things. But I would argue that if it wasn't for certain things like the wage subsidies, as an example, the majority of restaurants, I think, doing takeout are losing cash flow and for sure losing money, but might be able to leverage turning that bottle of wine into cash, which is needed to help support your employees and things like that. Ultimately speaking, if you look at Restaurants Canada's statistics, the industry has an average profit margin of 4.5%. If your sales go down by even 50% or whatever, there's just no room for profit whatsoever. And again, you're seeing that where without the wage subsidy, without the rent programs and all those kinds of things, without landlords who are for the most part in our case, and I hope for our peers and a lot of the advocacy I do is to help get them there, is they realize that it'd be better to get no rent for 6 months than not have a tenant for 6 years. And I think when you look at some of the statistics, the places like CBRE and them saying, without concerted effort to solve this issue, real estate could see a 50% vacancy rate in commercial leases for the next X number of years, with rates going down as much as 50%. There is this ecosystem that needs to be protected to save ourselves from each other and so on and so forth, and just the broader community and everyone else that that relies on those industries.
So that's a great point about the whole ecosystem and how everything is interconnected. Do you feel that like this is an opportunity for restaurants to take a look at their business model and maybe innovate their business model? Because that 4% margin that's a tough one. And one of the things that you were doing so successfully at O&B was you were really diversifying. There was everything from like super high end event, quick service, alcohol. What can be done to innovate the restaurant model itself during, like, can we learn anything from this and make changes for the future?
Yeah, look, I think it is for sure. And I know a lot of guys are saying, look, everyone should come out of this and raise their prices and we should charge a fair price and a true price and this and that. And I think, look, as much as I hope that is the case and we can get back to the margins we saw in the 90s or the early 2000s where you could expect to make 10 or 12% as an independent small operator. I just think that it'll be interesting to see if that happens, and it'll be interesting to see that with some 30% already closed their doors forever, how many people come back in the industry and all that kind of stuff. There are these weird pros and cons to a pandemic where when you're in a position of crisis, you really figure out what do you need versus what do you not need, and the systematic impacts that'll have. I think everyone is looking at that and saying, look, how do you make this more worth it? Because most restaurateurs that are out there, it is a labor of love, and despite us being a larger company, it's still a family business, and we do our best to treat our employees like family and do what we can. But you aren't in this industry for the money, though you can get it where servers can make upwards of $100,000 at the best of times. You aren't as protected as a lot of other industries that you could be in. And so you really have to love the industry to be in here, and you really have to love socializing, being with people, talking to people, meeting new people. I do think some of the things like meal kits and grocery delivery to a certain extent will continue for groups like us. I don't know how viable that'll be for a one-off independent operator that will still have the same struggles they'll have going forward. And depending on their landlord and whether or not this rent program gets off the ground, some of these guys, if they're closed for 3 or 4 or 5 months, they might have $100,000 bill owing to the landlord before they're allowed to reopen. And that is no small amount of money. I think at the same time, we're seeing opportunities that we couldn't have dreamed of. And though we don't know what the landscape is looking like, in the last 2 to 3 weeks, with landlords seeing tenants leaving their spaces and just handing them the keys and saying, look, I don't have any more fight left in me. I'm getting calls for dozens and dozens of opportunities that would have cost me a lot of money to go into just 3 or 4 months ago, where landlords are saying, how much will it cost me for you to take this space? I can't afford to have this space vacant. What can we do? And we are fortunate that we're in that position, that we know that comparatively, we feel very confident we're going to reopen our restaurants and get back to business. And despite it taking a couple of years to get there, we're confident in that. There are going to be, for those who do hold on, and I hope my peers do hold on, and part of why I advocate as much as I am, is you need a healthy ecosystem. You can't just have it where guys like me are the only ones that survive this. We want to have it where that next up and coming groups of guys and folks come through this, because it makes for a healthier ecosystem and a better dining scene in Toronto or Montreal or Calgary, wherever we are. And I think we really need to make sure that happens and do everything we can to have that. But those who do hold on and those who do survive, and whether it ends up being only 50% of us left or 25% of us left, the opportunities on the other side of this will be there, because I am a firm believer that though things will change in the short term and potentially even the medium term, I don't believe that the human species will give up on tens of thousands of years of wanting to socially gather, or even in nightclubs where people say the nightclub business is dead. I go, people for generations and centuries have wanted to come together and dance and celebrate. I don't, as much as this is great, Jason, and it's awesome, but I enjoy being in the same room with you the number of times we have been in the past. And I don't believe that I'll never see you again in person. I don't believe that will not come back eventually. So my hope here is that the industry can hold on, and more people will be like us and come out of this to what will be hopefully a brighter future.
Well, that's a great segue into the next question, is what can we do to help? So everyone from the government right up to me, because I'm a huge fan of your restaurant. So what can the government do to help, and what can our TL Insider members in this virtual event, what can we do to help restaurants right now?
So a huge part of where I pivoted my role and with Save Hospitality and all that, I never thought I'd become an advocate. Michael Bonacini, who's on TV, told me once I had a face for radio, which I've told you, Jason, a whole lot. That is why I haven't done these things. But I felt a bit of a moral obligation to get out there and try and fight for guys. I would not give the government a very good rating as far as how they've helped our industry. And I think that if you look at other countries like Australia, where they have 400 to 500 individual economic programs, and you compare it to our government's response, I think they deserve credit in ensuring people had money to put food on the table at the individual personal level. And I think that was dealt relatively or done relatively well. And I think we're starting to see some of the issues of all the fraudulent SEBA or CERB transactions. But overall, I think that was good, and you needed to focus on that first and foremost. But I have a really hard time understanding the government not wanting to get more industry specific, and that treating us the same way as a gas station, as an example, where the statistics that are out there are that a gas station to do $1 million in revenue only has 1.2 employees, whereas in the restaurant business you need 15. In conventional retail, you need 6 employees on average to do $1 million. We need 15. That when you look at the programs that they've come out with and said, we've given you so much, why isn't this helpful? You sit here and you go, look, rent at some of my downtown properties are north of $100,000 a month. So a $40,000 SEBA loan covers 11 days, and I still don't qualify for it because my rent is over $50,000. And if your payroll is over $1.5 million, as an example for the SEBA loans, that covers 12 days of payroll. That's it. Whereas if you're at the lower end of that spectrum, it covers 2 years of payroll. So the way that I've described it when I'm talking to ministers at the government is saying, I'm a hefty, relatively fat guy, and our industry might be the Titanic sinking, and what you've provided me is a life jacket for someone that's 90 pounds. But the equivalent would be like, I'm like 3,000 pounds, and you're saying that should be enough to save you. The math just doesn't add up. The program being 7,500% different between the ends of the spectrum just doesn't make sense. So as far as like, how can guys like you help, I think you need to start challenging the government to say, wait a second, if your plans are supposed to be working and saving an industry like hospitality, why have 30% of them already closed their doors? And I think when you look at what's really going on here, the government having 3 or 4 programs, really, that's all they've got, really, for industry. They've got the wage subsidy program, which, when you look at the statistics of having only 13% uptick in usage of it, I would argue is an epic failure. Yeah. And the reason it was a failure was they started at 10%, and everyone said, well, that's going to do absolutely nothing. That's a 10% wage subsidy makes no sense. Everyone got laid off. They did do the right thing and up it to 75%, which is more reasonable, albeit substantially less than other G7 countries. But by the time they did that and released the rules, everyone was already laid off. So you sat here and you said, well, is it worth it to bring someone back for 3 or 4 weeks? Because they literally only just announced the extension, I think it was last week. So you sit here and go, well, that was a bit of a failure. You go on the SEBA loan program again. It is loans on loans for an industry that is indebted. If you're a small guy and you're in Toronto and you have one restaurant, you're paying $30,000, $40,000 a month in rent. A $40,000 loan gets you through 1 month, not 3. So the government came up with a rent relief program. They called it the small business commercial rent relief program. And when you look at that program, and I'd ask you guys to look at it and say, is it really a small business rent relief program, or is it a landlord bailout program? Because 100% of the option of using it is at the landlord's option. And I can tell you, having talked to a lot of our landlords, and again, the majority of our landlords have been great, and they're sitting here, and especially as this has gone on and on, they're working like us with imperfect information, trying to figure out what to do here. But when you sit here and the government keeps saying we're paying 50% of the rent for small business, that's actually not correct. And I think it's beholden to media to say, wait a second, you keep saying this program does this, this, and this, but you're not covering 50% of the rent. You're covering 50% of expenses, and you're not really clear on what are or are not going to be permitted expenses. And if you're in a multi-tenant building and some of your rent is covered and some of your rent isn't covered, but your expenses are covered, well, does that mean we qualify or not qualify? And so I think the government's begun scapegoating landlords, saying 80% said they're not going to participate in the program. I would understand why they won't participate, because the rules were only just issued last week or this week. And when you read the rules, you're sitting here going, this is crazy. There's no way to understand how this program will actually work. And again, every other G7 country had a rent program in place in the month of March. We are May 22nd, and we are trying to figure out what to do about April, May, and June rents with no comment on July and August and everything else. it's been really disappointing to see how slow they'll react to our industry and really several others the governments have been. So I think the more in which you guys, as the general population out there, will see and say, look, at the end of the day, without more government aid, you will end up having 50, 60, 70% of Main Street boarded up, whether it's restaurant business or other. They will simply just disappear for a generation. And it's really sad to me, I live close to Bayview Avenue, to think that I'll be walking up and down there with my kids and they will have a completely different upbringing that could have been avoided, is being avoided in so many other G7 countries.
Wow. That was a tour de force there, Andrew, in your analysis of the situation, and that's actually a great entry point into what you said earlier about the nightclub businesses. You'd said people are saying it's dead because people can't convene. So it seems like we're slowly reopening the city now. Yep. So we actually interviewed some people in the government who were talking about what their vision could look like for a restaurant to open in the future. So what will it look like when you guys slowly start to reopen? And is reopening even possible with physical distancing in place?
Yeah, so I think one of the big things to mention again, and this is just where I find there's a lot of miscommunication where governments like to make announcements that sound great, but then the reality, you're like, well, that actually doesn't work. And so ultimately, when we believe that we're going to be allowed, like most jurisdictions, to say you can open with 50% of your regular capacity. And that's good because it's a good headline. But the reality is, it's 50% of your capacity to maximum, subject to distancing rules of 2 meters per table, which is if that's what we need to do for the safety of our guests and our staff, we should do that 100%, not arguing. But the reality is, because of how expensive rents are and just how the restaurant business is, we have to try and cram as many people into that space as we usually do. So just because they say you're going to be able to operate at 50%, I would argue that 95% of restaurants will be operating closer to 30%, because that's how many seats they will be able to safely have in there. And really, and again, in fairness to the government, a lot has happened, and it's happening very quickly. We're looking at, if we put plexi between them, are they going to allow that? How high does it have to be? How wide does it have to be? All those kinds of things. And we have a team of people that is looking at what other countries are doing, from South Korea to Germany to Australia to New Zealand, and you're trying to find the best practices. But at the end of the day, we're going to adhere to whatever the Ontario government or the City of Toronto mandate for us. Look, I think that we will. We my understanding, and from the rumors out there and talking to a bunch of people, is the government is looking to have us open patios in mid-June for a couple of weeks. Wow. Which works and doesn't work all at the same time, because if it starts raining halfway through, what do? Typically, when you run a restaurant, you have patios. For every patio seat, you have to leave an empty seat in the restaurant. But in this case, well, if they're not allowed to go in the restaurant, what do? We're looking at putting our menus online so that you can't, we're not going to have to hand menus out to people to look at it on their phone and all that. People, we believe, will be wearing masks. I think our employees right now at our grocery and takeout places have been doing their temperatures before and after, but it's turning out that that's not really something that actually does much. Other countries have required you to take everyone's name and number and take their temperature. I don't know that Ontario's or Canadians are looking to do that. There's, we have a bit more of that American mentality of live free or die to a certain extent. So we'll see how that goes. And then my understanding is by July or early-ish July, they're hoping that if things continue to progress the way that they want on the health side, we'll be able to open again at that physically distanced restaurant space. And we'll have to see how that goes. But there's tons of things, every day I'm on calls with different people. We have restaurants that are not on the main floor. Well, if they're limiting elevators to 2 or 4 people, how does that work? How do you have Canoe as an example, which we just reopened and you're very familiar with? How do we operate that restaurant with a substantially limited elevator capacity? What does that look like? And so, everyone's working together to figure this out as best we can. Our landlords have been, for the most part, very, very good. But things will be different until they're not. And I think from my perspective, there's 2 routes that we're going to end up going. Is we are going to say we're not going to change anything, and nightclubs will never happen until vaccines, which I tend to believe that just will not happen. And the reason I don't think that'll happen is unless the news I'm watching is false, which I find it very hard to know what's real or what's not anymore. But my understanding is we've never in the history of the human race found a coronavirus vaccine. So coronavirus has been one of those things that we've just not been able to find a successful vaccine. And if we do, it might be like the regular flu, where it's year after year after year, a new one. That Danny Meyer saying, I'm not opening my restaurants again until the vaccine's found. I'm like, well, unfortunately, he might not open his restaurants again. And then the other way where I think that people will sit there and say, if the statistics are true and that this virus is devastating to those with pre-existing conditions and to people of a certain age, how do we protect those folks and have the rest of society go back slowly while we continue to learn more and more, because we're still in the early innings here, and then effectively have it where life gets back to normal through just time of saying, look, we have to go on, we have to continue to live. There will be an inflection point in any society at which staying locked down will cause more people to die potentially from other causes, from postponing the 100,000 surgeries in this country to depression and isolation and all that kind of stuff. That we will eventually have to look at that curve and say, what is the least destructive path forward? And how do we mitigate then as many of the risks that we can have? And if that means masks forever, maybe we'll have masks forever. I don't think that's going to happen, but we'll have to have it. It'll move to a more mitigation of spread than anything else.
Man, like when you were describing some of the different, different additions to the restaurant experience, whether it be checking the temperature or separating people, having a really half empty room, basically. In my head, as you were speaking, I was like trying to figure out how that could be a fun night. I'm not sure.
Look, I just saw this Israeli company come out with a patent where it's a face mask that is hooked up to a button that it stays closed, and when you want to take a bite, it slowly opens and closes. I'm like, this is like Hannibal Lecter kind of stuff. And, look, I guess people can get used to anything at the end of the day, but I do believe that if the stats continue to be true, that the mortality rate of this is exponentially low for certain people versus others, there's going to have to be a way of saying, how do we figure that out and go to that. And more than anything else, as much as this might sound crazy, COVID has been devastating for our industry. But hopefully, if enough people like you and the people participating in this chat push the government to actually do enough to save businesses, so that we actually have taxpayers to pay back the deficits that we have and don't continue to run on half measures, I am less concerned about COVID in the long term than I am the larger structural changes that people are saying about how the world will change with respect to cities, as an example. And so if you look at places like whether it's Google or Twitter or Shopify, saying we might not have offices in the next X number of years, or whatever bank saying we're going to remove 80% of our spaces in downtown Toronto or urban centers, those are things that actually give me more of a heart palpitation, because those are long-term structural changes that though we'll have more time to evaluate and change, the economic consequences of real estate values, if no one's in downtown cores, that economically for society could be devastating. And in those long-term, economic issues that could lead to a depression, to me are more concerning than figuring out this hugely devastatingly terrible virus. But again, that I believe, and though I know it'll take time and it'll run its course, it is a short-term thing, but it will lead to potential large structural changes, not just for our industry, but just for society at large.
So you're talking about vulnerability. This has really exposed major vulnerabilities all across the infrastructure of our city. So, obviously I was reading an article which said like 70% of Main Street businesses could be gone at the end of this. So my question is, it's an incredibly confusing time, because every time I see the news, it's like, we're slowly reopening, yet it's still a state of emergency until June. Like, it's like, okay, well, what's going on?
Make
so
up your mind.
So I guess my question then is like, how much longer do you think this type of a lockdown can go on? Do you think that 70% number is an actual thing, or is that just the media again, just trying to?
I think without, look, it's very challenging to answer that question because there's so many variables there. If the government just said, we're going to take Sweden's model, we're going to accept a higher death rate, that though is high, is by no means, it's not exactly 10% of the population there's dying. It's just a higher rate than the average for developed countries. Eventually, you have to choose: do you want to have an economy that is sustainable, that can pay for healthcare and taxes and all that kind of stuff down the line, or do you want to shelter in place for as long as you can? And I think had our government done more in banning travel earlier on from hotspots and done the things that, like countries like New Zealand, which has no COVID anymore, things are going back to normal because they did things that just were more common sense than just blindly, seemingly accepting the WHO as an example and saying, don't worry about travel bans, don't worry about face masks, and all these things that now seem to have become great ideas. Had we done those earlier on, I think there was a study saying 85% of deaths would have been avoided had the lockdown started and travel ban started March 1st. So literally a 2-week difference is 85% of our deaths. I think that's a bit of a big problem to look at. But I think that the number will be higher than 70% of small businesses not surviving if things aren't handled better than they are right now. We have the time to avoid that and have it where our economy can come back. But every day that we allow 1,000 small businesses across this country, be it restaurant or otherwise, to fail, that creates more and more of a problem. And I think if you're, forgetting a company like ours, we're a large, big company. We are better capitalized than most, albeit again, we do need support and help from the government as well. If you're a one-off small operator and you're facing massive payables to your suppliers, a huge rent waterfall, you sooner than later, these guys are realizing, and I think that's why we're seeing this, and whether it's restaurant or otherwise, you are better off to walk away from your building, your business, and go to your landlord where someone else has already done that and saying, I'd like to start over. I want 2 years rent free. I don't want to pay $100 a foot. I'm not going to pay my suppliers. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that, because that is what's best for me. And if the government's not going to help me do what's best for society, what do I do? And the more that people do that, the more that people are going to start to do that more and more and more. And that is where I've been advocating. The government is saying, you have to understand, you are making it where that going and walking away from your existing business to start a new one, especially if you're a smaller guy in one-off or one or two locations or 1 or 2 stores or whatever, you are much better off to just walk away from all of your debts, make that everyone else in society's problem than the current plan forward. And so, look, I would argue that I'm on calls with the government at least 3 to 4 times a week, begging them to change course, or as an example, I fought really hard to have them extend the wage subsidy. Don't do it as a month by month announcement. I appreciate it's a great headline, but business owners need longevity of a path forward. And we've asked them to say, look, the next time you do this, can you plan it 6 months ahead and say, here's how we intend to wind down. We'll adjust if we have to, but at least give a path where you can plan no longer in your immediate day-to-day, hour by hour. We need to think about a 12, 18, 24-month recovery. And though that might not get the headlines you want because you're doing it all at once, unfortunately, we shouldn't be political right now. We need to come up with a plan that makes the most sense, that actually gets things driving forward, because the number could be worse than 70% of businesses failing. But that will be society's choice to allow that to happen and allow our government to make decisions that other G20 countries are just not doing.
Wow. Well, what's next for O&B? I mean, are you hopeful? You went, like, you said some things. So what's next for O&B? Are you hopeful?
Yeah, look, so we are mobilizing. Like this morning before I was on a call with you, we were mobilizing our opening plan, saying, look, let's work back. If June 15th, when we think everything can change, but if June 15th, when we think we're gonna be able to open patios, we started to reopen restaurants. So we opened Babel last week for takeout delivery. We were supposed to open Maison Selby today, but unfortunately we got broken into, and so we were gonna have to delay that. That's our 4th break-in. So that's, again, another thing happening here. It's our 4th break-in. We're being kicked when we're down, but you got to move on. So we're going to open Selby, we hope, in the next couple of days after we get that cleaned up. And slowly but surely, we're going to start opening our places before June 15th for takeout and delivery, so that the wheels are in motion, that the engine is oiled and fine-tuned. And at the same time, I'm touring more and more spaces with landlords to say, look, I do not want to live in a city with 50% of buildings boarded up. I don't want that for my family. I don't want to live here if that's what's going to happen. I don't think your readers want that to happen. And the more that we can then figure out a way to work with landlords or other partners or other people who are on the ropes that need that extra bit of help or support, I hope we can do that. I hope there's a program where we can help guys survive this better. Because if we don't do that, weeks and weeks ago, someone said, why are you helping your competitors? I go, no one's a competitor anymore. We're all peers. We're all peers, and you have to believe you're in this together, and you have to help each other out. And we started selling, we've offered to sell through our grocery other companies' products, because if that helps them survive, then that helps, that is just a good thing. Because if one of my competitors goes under, my supplier is going to get screwed. And if my suppliers get screwed, eventually it comes down. We are in an ecosystem where you have to have the ecosystem stay healthy. And our hope is to do that. And my hope here is, as far as our future goes, look, we have been growing our business at on average 25% a year for the last 4 to 5 years. We've had exponential growth. 2020 will not be that. We will be down. There's no way our sales will be higher this year than they were last year. 2021, hopefully, we might get to on par or only slightly down. But my hope here is that we will come back stronger than ever. We will be better positioned with some of the things that we're doing, and we're doing a lot more of these meals to go at home, these meal kits. Selby's Coq au Vin home. The quality is unbelievable despite it having been frozen. It is not the same experience as going to the restaurant, but it is not the worst next best option if you're stuck at home and you want a date night and you want to feel like you're getting out of your normal routine. Those are things we plan on continuing to do. We might continue to do grocery to a certain extent and more meal kits. So our hope here is that a lot of people will survive and innovate and come together and figure out a way for a path forward, that the industry will not be better this year. It likely will not be better next year, but we can be a big part of ensuring there is a healthy hospitality community in Toronto and across the country, the markets we operate, as best we can.
Yeah, it feels like at the end of this, there's going to be some really interesting, diverse businesses, that restaurants are going to be doing a lot of different things and to add value to the restaurant goer, to my life, which is going to be awesome.
Yeah.
So I guess, my last question before I open it up to questions to the group is, okay, so quarantine is done. We are open. City's back. What is the first thing you're going to do when you can leave your house?
Yeah, I'm going to go on, I'm going to gain I've lost 50 pounds, and I fully intend on gaining, hopefully not all of it, but a huge chunk of it back by going to as many restaurants as I can. And people do pub crawls and try a bunch of drinks and this and that. I want to do the drinking and the eating at a dozen different places as quickly as I can. Not only to support the community and our restaurants and others, but I am going stir crazy. I enjoy socializing. I enjoy being out with people, and I love my kids and I love my family and everything. But we really look forward to getting out and feeling normal again.
That's great. And I'm gonna open it up to questions. So if you would like to ask a question, this is the fun part. You can turn your camera on, unmute. You can ask Andrew the question directly, and I'll start. We have a question that was presented, which was, you have your team looking at what other countries are doing. Have you seen anything really interesting in terms of or innovative in terms of how a country has been reopening their restaurants? In the United States, it doesn't seem like they're not doing anything very innovative there. It's like they just opened up and it's wrecked. Have you been seeing anything that actually we would probably want to steal?
Yeah, look, I think the hard part is nothing gets the U.S. market is where sales are the best, and that's because they've just done that. They've just said, look, let's just see what happens and we'll go from there. And JP Morgan just released a stat, I think, that showed that as people have opened up, cases have actually not necessarily increased. We'll see if that's enough time or whatever. Look, I think it would be a mistake in Canada. And again, I think, like you said, U.S. is different. It's just a different place. We need to build everyone's confidence back. We've been sheltered in place, like you said, and you said, well, we're in crisis, but we're opening. You're like, the mixed messaging is just banging around your head. I think what we really need is open, honest communication from government and government officials at all levels to sit there and say, just tell us the truth. I appreciate that we maybe said we didn't need masks in the early days because we just didn't have enough masks. But maybe we should have said, guys, we don't have enough masks. We don't want you to go buy masks. But if you can put a bandana on your face, that actually would be helpful. If we could just be more open and honest to get the absolute confidence back that it is safe to go out with the procedures that we have, I think that would be very, very good. And so I think it would be huge if we looked at that as the model. I think having face masks and all that kind of stuff is going to work. I think plexi is going to work to a certain degree, but the vast majority of places, that's what they're doing. And I think where they're doing things that are a little bit more aggressive, like you needing to have an app to be able to even go out, or where they take your temperature and your information, the privacy laws are just not the same, right? We have it where we're a very liberal society, and there might come a time where we have to say, how much liberty are we willing to have versus having to be locked down? I don't think Canada is there yet. And so I think we have to look at what's reasonable of what people are going to be able to do and agree to do. So I do think it'll be masks for a long time. We have great health and safety standards already in this country. I think there'll be more of an emphasis on ensuring people don't come to work if they're sick, doing your best to send people home and what those rules are around that. But generally speaking, I think if in talking to landlords where they feel office cores are only going to be 25% occupied, I think it'll be slow going anyway, and that we'll just naturally, hopefully, have that comfort factor come back over the coming weeks and months, and hopefully, despite the fact that it is highly likely we'll have a second and third wave, like most pandemics. Ideally, those we are going to learn from what we need to learn from, and go from there.
Yeah, that's absolutely. I agree with you 100%. And now we're going to open up some questions. So there's a question from Jen. Her question is, I'm trying to support restaurants with takeout and delivery as much as possible, but the environmental side of me is also feeling guilty about all the plastic waste we're creating. If this will be, if this is something, is there something that the industry can do to reduce the environmental impact of delivery and takeout?
Yeah, look, I think people do look at where they can get the most sustainable sourcing of packaging, but at the end of the day, you can't get rid of packaging, especially at a time now. We can't have it where, I think with Starbucks and guys like us who have coffee shops, one of the first things you did was you had to get rid of that human-to-human contact. Look, I think if this is going to be super long term, I think hopefully there could be support or government programs that help us fund more environmentally friendly takeout containers. I think it's also hard for a restaurateur to say, look, should I double my cost at a time where I'm losing money? It's just a really hard balance at the end of the day to do it. I think one of the best things you could do is order directly from the restaurant if you're trying to help them out when you're doing takeout and delivery, avoiding those third-party apps that can take 20, 30, 40% of the revenues. I think that's one of the things that we look at, our companies look at, partners like ours, like IQ Foods, really look at sustainable packaging, and we haven't moved away from that in those places. But I think it for smaller guys where the cost is just so hard, I think that'll be really, really tough.
Another question from Fia, and this is absolutely in your wheelhouse. What is your advice for catering companies?
Yeah, so on my end, we're one of the largest catering groups in the country, do more events than most out there. Look, catering companies they are blessed and they are cursed all at the same time. They're blessed in the sense that their rents are typically a lot lower than restaurants, and they typically can do a lot of sales out of one location that's a commissary. At the same time, they are going, that business is going to be slower to come back. And though I'm seeing green shoots, I mean, we booked weddings. I think we booked 11 weddings yesterday for 2021 and 2022. So wow. People are going to continue on. It is one of these things of how do you ensure that you will survive this and get to the other side, because there will just be that much more opportunities. I think a lot of the caterers right now that I'm seeing have either done grocery delivery or they're doing a lot of meal kits and things like that. I fully appreciate that is a drop in the bucket, absolutely. But I think that is another one where we've gone and I've been lobbying the government saying, you are taking a broad approach and comparing the hospitality industry, which includes restaurants and catering, as the same as a gas station or retail. In our industry, catering and restaurants are very, very different. And it's challenging to see how they can't see that without an industry-specific solution, that not only will it be more economical for them, but it'll actually result in saving the most businesses. So on my end, on the catering side, I think looking at what other companies are doing, what other catering companies are doing globally, which we've been doing, we're seeing a huge demand for backyard weddings of 15 people because they're hoping that we get to that point. I think pivoting to that is huge. We're looking at doing a lot more in-office catering, where folks that won't want keep people going to restaurants and food courts and looking at that. I think what you need to do is batten down the hatches, assume this is going to be a long road ahead. Obviously hope for the best, but you need to plan for the worst in this situation. And keep as much cash flow and liquidity as you can, and then figure out as many opportunities as you can to generate that revenue. That is these meal kits or smaller catering drops to pivot your business.
We have a question from Simon, and Simon's question is, if you've heard from landlords and governments about evictions, Queen's Park halted residential evictions by suspending hearings to the landlord and tenant board. Is there a reason he's hearing as to why they can't make a change to the Commercial Tenancy Act? What would you like to see happen around stopping commercial evictions?
So I look with this, and my understanding is they stopped evictions during COVID, but I don't know that it actually solves the problem, because once COVID's over, if you have a huge debt that you have to pay, you're just going to get evicted. So though I do believe the right thing is to stop commercial evictions, I don't think it's actually the solution, and I think it just punts the issue down the road. And I feel that we have so many fires burning right now in society and our economies that stopping on a fire that might make it a little bit smaller, but then creates 10 more fires that we're going to have to deal with, is 100% not the right way to solve this issue. And though I think it's great and I'm advocating to stop commercial evictions, I know in my heart of hearts the odds are highly unlikely that the provinces are going to do that, whether it's Ontario or otherwise. It's just, there's been so many demands and calls and media asking for it, it's just not going to happen. Or I don't believe you should be banking on that being the reason to save you. What I think would have been the better way to do it, and I think what'll come out is that this rental program the federal government launched with the provinces, it's almost as if they did it to make it as difficult as they could for it to be accessed, that they were trying to make it unsuccessful. And though I know that's not true, I think if you look at other countries where instead of saying, here's how we're going to have this convoluted way to apply, they went and said, we're going to give small businesses money that they have to use for rent, and you're going to pay your rent, and they mandated a haircut from landlords. Had we just done that, you would not have any of these issues. No one could be evicted because you would be paying your rent. And I think it's very important to remember, landlords have done nothing wrong. Landlords have expenses. Landlords have to pay property taxes that are exorbitantly high in places like Toronto. And that without those rents getting paid, the ecosystem continues to break down. If we have locations where our property taxes are $40,000 a month, if we don't pay that, so if we don't pay that, that's $500,000 the city of Toronto now does not have, which they desperately need. And I think that the best way to have dealt with this issue, and again, where you guys can say we need more from you, is why are we not doing things that other countries have done that work versus coming up with things that right now landlords are unhappy, tenants are unhappy, and the populace is sitting there going, I don't get it. They said they solved the rent issue on May 22nd for April and May rents, yet no one seems to be having that work. So fundamentally speaking, I think the eviction thing would help to an extent, but I think it literally just punts the issue to say, okay, well, if you're all you're doing is banning the eviction until COVID's over, when is it over? And what do you have with all that rent that's in arrears? Because if you don't address that issue, again, if a small restaurateur is paying $25,000 a month in rent as an example, and let's God forbid say we don't open in July, or we do open in July, they have a $75,000 bill they got to pay, and they've only gotten a $40,000 loan, which they've likely spent on insurance and interest, and the math just doesn't add up right now to have solved this issue the way that other countries like Holland or Denmark or even the United States, where they've provided upwards of 100% of rent funding to keep that ecosystem going, and not needing places like Vancouver have demanded or begged for a $200 million bailout. If people aren't thinking that our services in the city of Toronto are going to have to be slashed, or our property taxes are going to go up 30 to 40%, those are the options right now because of the choices of the federal government to not fund people like us to then pay our rents.
Wow. So we have time for two more questions, and we have them here. One is from Teresa. And what are your thoughts on revamping menus with the commodity food pricing and supply issues? Example, beef and pork market currently.
Yeah, so I'll say this is a fortunate thing. We've had to deal with commodity food pricing issues all of the time. So whether it was avocados back in the day to when swine flu happened and pork and this and that. So as far as being able to get access to those things, at the end of the day, it'll just come down to price. And then it's a matter of, do we think people will go from paying $35 for a steak to $70 for that same steak? It's just going to be market demand and supply, and we'll have to amend our business models accordingly. And hopefully, we will see those plants come back online, and it is a short-term issue as opposed to a long-term issue. Systematically, I think it's something like we have 4 plants that represent 85% of all meat production. Maybe that's something that long-term we'd say, hey, this is a program to help Alberta. We want to build 3 or 4 more plants because we don't think this makes sense. And having conditions where people are working like this is a long-term viable solution. That if you believe Bill Gates that we're going to have pandemics like this every 15 to 20 years, maybe let's have the foresight of saying, how do you avoid and learn from the mistakes of the past so they don't repeat themselves in the future?
I agree with that. And this is the final question. This is from Deb. And her question is, any advice to event and hospitality professionals that have been laid off or temporarily laid off regarding skills development? When industry is ready to hire back, is there anything that could help potential employees do during this time to make them more attractive as your basically brand new style of businesses open up?
Yeah, look, I think the industry has been lucky, and again, I don't have any examples off the top of my head, but there are a lot of folks out there, especially on the software side, where their incremental cost of providing that service isn't so high. They've sat there and said, you know what, we have to do our part, and we've been very fortunate. We have suppliers who have cut our costs and fees where they're not, to effectively they're out of pocket, saying we can't give it away 100% for free, but we'll drop it 80, 50, 60%, whatever we can do to help you guys during this really tough time. And we're blessed to have such a generous a community and ecosystem there, and that is extended to services or to services where online learning. So, Deb, my advice to you would be to go out there and try and find as many courses that are being provided for hospitality sector folks out there. If you're already in the sector, reach out to your HR department, or if they don't have an HR department, the people there that you worked with, to see if there are programs that they've come across that potentially are things that can help you out.
That's great. Well, this takes us to the end of the chat. This was great, Andrew. This was incredibly informative. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. Yeah, I mean, our hope is that when we reopen and the industry comes back, obviously in real life, when we bring Toronto Life Insider back into the real world, we're going to be doing a lot of stuff at O&B Restaurants. It's a big part of our mix. We love it. So we're really hopeful, and we're happy you were able to share some of your insights with us today. To everyone who's still here, thank you for joining us. We have some other events coming up. We're actually launching the TL Insider Book Club with Katrina Onstadt. That's taking place on May 26th. So if you'd like to attend that, please let us know and we'll send you the information. And then our next Fireside Chat will be with Sarup Barwani, CEO and founder of Senso AI. And he's going to talk about entrepreneurship during COVID-19. So thank you so much for joining us today. This was great. Andrew, looking forward to reconnecting again. And first thing I'm going to do out of quarantine is we'll grab a drink. Finally, we'll do that, and we'll talk about our partnership.
Thank you so much, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you.